Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. I am thrilled to present this conversation with cartoonist and trans woman Dana Simpson. If you're not familiar with her strip, Phoebe and Her Unicorn, you are in for a treat. But I also wanted to update you on an incident that happened just over a week ago. In episode 8, I traveled to Boston for the Portraits of Pride exhibit on the Common, and I heard a number of comments about how such a public celebration of queer leadership was indicative of progress and of a better understanding of our role in civic and political arenas. Well, a few days after that, someone took a blade to a number of the photographs. Portraits of Beth Chandler, Aaliyah Cusalito, and Derek Young Jr., all of which were discussed and described in our episode, were vandalized. It's not surprising, but it hurts my heart. I guess there's work yet to be done. Well, Dana Simpson, welcome to Transqat.
Hi, happy to be here.
I suppose I should start with saying that my name is Claire and I use she, her pronouns, but the truth is, in anticipation of this conversation, I went and checked out a unicorn name generator. And my name is Misty Time Legs.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's time the seasoning, not the temporal measurement. So,
okay, I did need that clarified
Yeah.
because, I mean, that's nice too. It's a lovely seasoning, but Misty Time Legs, that sounds like the Doctor Who of unicorns.
Exactly. I'm just going to jump right into controversy here with you.
Most of the time when I go on podcasts, it's like, so let's talk about unicorns. I welcome a little bit of controversy.
It is a deeply held philosophy on my part that animals should not wear clothing. However, you have changed my life because I'm considering getting leg warmers because of how cute Marigold looks in her leg warmers.
Marigold would argue that leg warmers are not necessarily clothing, they're accessories.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It's, you can be naked and still accessorize and look cool if you are a unicorn.
This is going to change my whole approach to dressing. So for our listeners who have not read your strip, A, what's wrong with you people? And B, could you just give us an overview of what Phoebe and Her Unicorn is about?
Hey, if you haven't read it yet, the pleasure of discovering it is still in front of you. Phoebe and Her Unicorn is a comic strip. It's syndicated in newspapers daily. It is also collected into now 16 books. And it is the story of a little girl and a magical unicorn who are best friends. The name of my unicorn is also from a unicorn name generator. People often ask me this. How did you name your unicorn character Marigold Heavenly Nostrils?
Gold Heavenly Nostrils.
I got that name because that's my unicorn name as per a unicorn name generator from the internet in 2011. I don't know if that one is still active, although Misty Time Legs, it sure sounds like the same one. I think it might be. The original title of the comic strip was Heavenly Nostrils. And the fact that we didn't ultimately go with that is not really my fault. So what happened was, to recap my journey with the title of the strip, I originally called it Heavenly Nostrils. And at the time, I had a development contract, and we were going to run the strip on gocomics.com, which is my publisher's website. Still runs there every day. You can read Phoebe and Her Unicorn and also so many comic strips. Like my syndicate distributes all the comic strips. Doonesbury's there, Peanuts is there. But I think just all the comic strips are either there or on King Features. Mm-hmm. So yeah, most of the comic strips are on gocomics.com. And before my strip was anywhere else, it ran there. And it was called Heavenly Nostrils. And they told me, you can call it that now. You can call your online-only comic strip Heavenly Nostrils, but in a couple of years, we're going to launch you in newspapers, and you have to change it. And I was like, why? It's a great title. And they were like, yes, but newspaper editors are conservative old men, and they don't go for weirdness. You'll get more newspapers if we call it something that isn't so polarizingly weird. And then, so I honestly kind of thought, I think, that everybody would get used to it. That people would hear Heavenly Nostrils enough times And they'd just be, by the time I got to the newspaper launch, we'd be like, yeah, whatever. No, they made me change it. Plus, shortly before the newspaper launch, the first book came out. And we were going to call that Heavenly Nostrils. And this is how it was relayed to me. Barnes and Noble told us they'd buy more copies if we called it something that was more descriptive of the book's content.
Well, it's hard to argue with Phoebe and her unicorn and its descriptiveness. It tells you immediately what the strip is about.
It's true, although I think Marigold would argue that she is not Phoebe's unicorn. She might argue with the possessive pronoun there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Phoebe and a unicorn would have been Marigold's
although
title.
I think she would go with the definitive article. I think she would be Phoebe and the unicorn.
Phoebe and the unicorn.
With the capital T, yeah.
Which would have been a fine title. I maybe should have argued with them on that one point, but this is the fulfillment of a dream. I wanted to be a syndicated newspaper cartoonist since I was 5 years old, and it was about to happen. And to quote Gary Larson, they could have called it Revenge of the Zucchini People for all I cared. Just do it. I just launch it. Call it whatever you want.
But now that it is such a huge success, how many newspapers?
I don't actually know. I think somewhere between 150 and 200, which, I mean, for perspective, a strip like Doonesbury is in 4 digits. Sounds like a lot of papers. It kind of is now because there aren't nearly as many papers as there used to be. I guess it's just not a great time for the newspaper industry. But it's reasonably widely distributed in newspapers. The real success of the comic has been in the books, of which there are 16. They've been bestsellers. I've won some book awards. It's a moderately successful syndicated strip and a fantastically successful book series.
And number 17 is due out in 2023 at some point? Okay.
Yeah, April. And it will be called Punk Rock Unicorn.
I saw the cover and I was very excited.
It's kind of my favorite cover.
But here's the thing that the cover of that brought up for me. In your head, does Marigold have an accent? Because when I think of punk, I think of, the original British Sex Pistols and
now future.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that accent, no.
Okay, so she doesn't sound like Johnny Lydon, but
she doesn't sound like John Lydon. Like, I don't know, when I do Marigold, like in readings, she has a sort of a mid-Atlantic, like Katharine Hepburn-y thing going on.
With a quaver in her voice. Yeah.
Baby, I am Marigold Heavenly Nostrils. I always used to say that I've had various voice actors in my head for Marigold over the years. The one I've kind of got in mind right now, if I could pick anybody really famous to be the voice of Marigold in an animated version, Jamila Jamil, Tahani from The Good Place.
I don't watch that, but I know I should know her from somewhere.
She has a very properly British accent. She was in She-Hulk recently, but
That's
she's doing
what it was. Yes.
But she was doing an American accent in that. Her real accent is British. And it's
so you do see a British accent as a possibility, at least.
I see it as a possibility. I don't think it's definitively the only voice that could work. So I'm friends with a portion of the cast of the show My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. And so I have done readings with both Nicole Oliver, Princess Celestia, and Tabitha St. Germain, Rarity. And they both do lovely marigolds, but they do it really differently. Nicole's marigold has this distinctly American accent. It's just very hello, Phoebe, I am Marigold. It's very it sounds American, but it sounds very properly American.
Sort of a Murder She
How about that as the kind of mid-Atlantic thing? She kind of does the Katharine Hepburn, oh, this is the worst thing ever. So I don't know. There's different valid interpretations, I think, of what Marigold sounds like. I'm not even personally consistent about it. And someday we'll get an animated version, and it'll be decided for everybody.
I had that later on in the list, but let's talk about it. There was a Nickelodeon deal in the works. Is that true?
Still in the works. I have learned not to take anything as a given in Hollywood, considering this is the second time we've been working on an animated show, and the first one fell through. The first one in 2017, we started working on it as a show at Amazon Studios for Amazon Prime. Almost 2 years into doing that, we had a pilot script. We had hired head writer and showrunner, and we had picked out a character designer. We were fairly deep into the process. And then Amazon had an executives shakeup at the top. And I gather this is a real old Hollywood story. The executives changed, projects got orphaned. They started giving me weird notes that seemed like they were just giving me notes to give me notes. Mm-hmm. What if Dakota was green? And so eventually they just killed all their kids' TV projects kind of off at once. And then after that, we were suddenly without a studio. But my friend who had been the showrunner on the Phoebe show went to Disney, and she was working on a show that was probably, if I talk about this enough times, Disney's probably going to sue me. But
Disney?
Whatever.
Litigious? No.
Never.
Not Disney.
They were working on a show there, and she became the showrunner for that. My friend who had been the showrunner on Phoebe. And she was like, do you want to come be a writer on this show? And I was like, great. Yeah, sure. That sounds fun. And I was in the writer's room there for a few weeks, and then Disney pulled the plug on that. That show got shelved. And so then Nickelodeon picked up the option for Phoebe, and we've been working on that now for 2 years. Well, they picked up the option 2 years ago. I think we've been working on it for about 1.5 years now. Mm-hmm. And it was going to be a movie at first. We had a script. It went through multiple drafts. And then they decided when the Big Nate show came out, that's another comic strip and book series.
Right.
And that was a big hit for Nickelodeon. So they were like, okay, well, what if Phoebe's a show? And I was like, fine, Heavenly Nostrils all over again.
Yes,
whatever. Just, I'd like to make something. And so that's kind of where we are right now. We're supposedly working on a TV show, although Nickelodeon has sort of made me repitch the show recently because stop me when this sounds familiar. There were some executive changes at the top. And so then they were like, well, what if this doesn't appeal enough to boys? This needs more boy appeal. And so I wrote another show treatment of it and sent it to them, which I'm getting good at doing, which was like, here's the boys that are in this show. Right. This is Max. He's quite prominent. He's like the other main character besides the two title characters. Is that good enough? Is that enough of a boy for you? But represent his entire gender. The ultimate sick irony of that being that Max is based on my spouse, who is non-binary. But I'm not going to tell Nickelodeon that. It might work against. I've been drawing comics my whole adult life and then some. And that was kind of, there were reasons for that. One is I just love comics. I always did from the time I picked up Peanuts when I was a little kid. I've always been a huge fan of the medium, but part of why I ended up there and not somewhere else too, I think, is that I didn't like group projects in school. I was that kid. Like I wanted, part of the appeal of comics is comics are a thing where I can just make something. I don't need anybody else to help me. I don't need anybody else to turn in their part of it. Nobody gets to say no. At least before I had editors, nobody got to say no. But even now, like my editors are fairly hands off. There's lines I probably couldn't cross, but I'm never that inclined to cross them. So mostly I just hand in whatever I want and they run it. With TV, you need a lot of other people's permission. It's a group effort. Everybody else gets a say creatively. There's a lot of veto points where if somebody else decides they don't want it to happen, it won't happen. Right. And that's really frustrating for somebody who's used to just deciding to do a comic and then you do it. I knew that there would be compromises working on a show in Hollywood, that mine would not be the only vision for it. It would have to coexist with other people's visions. That's fine. I can do that. But it's frustrating that nothing's even been made yet in 6 years. I hope we get there. I believe in my heart that sooner or later, the moment for this will arise. I had lunch with a friend who's like a prominent animation person and also a woman right as this was all going down. And I was like, help me out, help me with this. And one of the things she told me was this stuff is cyclical. And like Hollywood will decide, oh, we have to market to girls are this huge untapped market. And then 3 years later, and then that's when you get Powerpuff Girls or Owl House. And then, a few years later, they'll be like, oh, girls don't watch animation. Well, it's because you're not making it for them. And then it'll be really hard to get something girl-centric on the air. And we may just be in a moment like that. But if that's the case, maybe my moment's 2 years from now.
You've said that both Phoebe and Marigold are aspects of you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's kind of a conversation I'm having with myself. The original concept for the comic, before there was a unicorn involved in it, the original concept was that the main character was going to be me, but as a little girl. And since this is a trans-themed podcast, I should probably
Right.
go into that a little bit. It was I won a contest in 2019. I won the comic strip superstar contest, and the prize was a development deal for a strip. And the idea that I won the contest with, was a strip that was just called Girl. And Girl, but right, it's very to the point.
Yeah.
It was about a little girl version of me, basically, who would become Phoebe. It was the seed of Phoebe, but she didn't have that name yet. She didn't have a name at all. The concept was that she hangs out in the woods behind her house with her talking animal friends. And they all have names like Bird and Rabbit, and so they'll call her Girl. And this was the concept that got me my development contract. But the whole idea was like, I had come through transition several years before this, and like a lot of trans people, I look at my childhood with some longing of what could have been. I never properly got to be the kid I think I deserve to get to be. I transitioned in my 20s, so it was like I never sort of got to be a little girl properly. And one of the great things about being an artist is you get to make the stuff happen in art that you think should have happened in reality. There's a certain wish fulfillment element to it. I can hear a lot of artists there being like, no, you portray reality, the cold hardness of reality. No, that's not what I do. I make things happen because I want them to happen.
Well, there's a unicorn in the title. It's, you
Yeah.
kind of abandon realism at that point.
I was never there. Realism was never the thing I did. If you want that, you have plenty of artists for that. I am not your girl. So I had this concept of like a little girl who was based on me. She had like freckles and dark hair and just me as a kid. And during the development process, she acquired a unicorn. And that was not, I didn't plan that. It was like the unicorn showed up one day. I drew one comic during the development process. I'm flailing a little bit. The syndicate's like, this isn't quite there. I'm trying different things to get that last, little bit over the finish line to get something that they'll want to launch. And then one day I drew her with a unicorn, and it was like, oh, right, this is it. Sometimes you have an idea and it just seems like an idea somebody should already have had. It was one of those. It was one of those times when it was just, somebody should be doing this already. A kid and a unicorn who are best friends. This should be a comic already. And nobody had done it. So I pitched it to my editors and they were like, oh yeah, that's really good. Let's see some of that. And I started drawing Phoebe and it all came together very quickly. And we launched like a few months after that. And Marigold, the personality Marigold ended up having is, I always say she's me, but she's a specific part of me. She's the voice in my head, and I hope everyone has this voice, and if not, everybody deserves to have this voice. The one voice in your head that's like, yeah, you're great. Keep on doing what you're doing. The sort of mental cheerleader voice, I guess. Marigold is that voice without any of the other voices going, yeah, Dana, but you never clean the house. Marigold is self-love personified. Marigold is the part of me that likes me with none of the other parts. And so it's a sort of a conversation. And Marigold is arrogant, but she's never arrogant at anybody else's expense, really.
Right.
She's not like, I am glorious, so you're not worth my time. She's like, I'm glorious. Let's hang out so you can enjoy how glorious
I am. Yeah, absolutely. That was my first attraction to the strip, was that I don't know that I have a voice that is kind to me in my head, to be honest.
Sorry to hear that. And you deserve one because you seem really neat.
Thank you. But I am arrogant. so it was that part of Marigold that I said, oh yeah, I'm in. I'm full in on this. Probably as wish fulfillment. It was like, yeah, here is someone who is completely confident in herself. You've said, I heard you say in an interview, that she is considerably sillier than she recognizes herself to be.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It sure does sound like something I'd say. It's absolutely true.
But that was what appealed to me, is I like, oh, that's that's what's missing from me, is some part of me that's just openly celebratory, you know?
I encourage you to cultivate that. I think everybody should. I think everybody deserves to be able to look at themselves and see what's there that's unique and worth everyone's time. I hope part of the role Marigold plays is encouraging my readers, many of whom are pretty young, to look at themselves in those terms. I
And
mean, Marigold helps Phoebe do that. Marigold often tells Phoebe what she likes about her.
and encourages her to try things, go off on flights of fancy, sort of indulge that spontaneous craziness that
Absolutely,
Phoebe
yeah.
can have. Yeah. What's
Sort of gets Phoebe out of the sort of just the mundane like school and then going home routine of her little life, which I think we could all use a unicorn to come do that,
well,
especially in the last few years.
do you see? I mean, there are bits of representation in your strip. Max's parents, and then one of the greatest character names of all time. In
Would you
fairness,
say
the unicorn of death.
Fernie for short,
Oh,
unicorn who is non-binary. Oh, fun fact. You know how many newspapers wouldn't run the strips where Fernie explains Fernie's pronouns are nay, nem, which is
yes.
funny, but it's also hard to remember to write. I always default to they, and then it's like, wait, no.
No, not for Fernie.
No,
No.
I created a neo pronoun for this character, and I got to use it. But you know how many newspapers wouldn't run the strips where Fernie explained that? One. It was the Deseret News in Salt Lake City. They wouldn't run that. I guess I mean, I feel like that's encouraging, or maybe it just means I don't have a lot of newspapers in really conservative areas to begin with.
Your strip is not sort of overtly a trans story or anything like
Yeah.
that. I recently had a conversation with Jadzia Axelrod, who wrote the DC graphic novel Galaxy the Prettiest Star. And that is just a trans coming of age story with, superhero trappings, sci-fi trappings. And yours is not that at all. But
Yeah, it's really
are there
I always
parts
tell
of
people
your
there's a character in the strip who's trans, and I'm never going to tell you which one it is.
but are there aspects of you being a trans woman that are present in the strip that wouldn't be if somebody else were doing this?
I think it's unavoidable, but it's subtle.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, yeah, there isn't, other than Fernie, there isn't really any overt trans content in the strip, but I do also think I have a view of gender and of identity that only a trans person maybe could have. I don't know. I don't know how much of that is just me being trans and how much of it is just society having shifted. Because, like, when I was a kid, I feel like, and I'm sure you could say the same. We're both of a certain age.
Yes, yes.
I feel like when I was a kid that ideas about what was for what gender were just really different and much more rigid. And I feel like, I can draw Max participating in a tea party, or I can give a character Sue's personality, which is sort of burn everything down.
I love
Uh,
that. I could never
yeah,
be Sue. So I love when Phoebe goes to camp so I can spend time with that person.
Sue is based on a real person,
Really?
and yeah, of my friend Lou, who is, as are so many of my friends, somewhere on the gender spectrum other than one of the binary poles. A lot of my characters are young. I often feel like if you check in with a lot of these kids in even 5 years, they're going to be all over the map in terms of gender expression. But they're like 9 years old. They're just the beginning of this particular journey.
Right.
Sue is going somewhere weird, and it's going to be fun, and it's going to be beautiful. And I almost kind of want to like write a strip about Sue when they are 16 years old, where this is leading. Yeah, I don't know. I think the ways that I'm sure that the way I write characters is influenced by my being trans, but I'm struggling to come up with the specific ways that it is. I think the big one that I can say definitively is just that being trans liberates you from conventional ways of thinking about how people are,
And for a
which seems
strip,
like something a cis person could also achieve, but being trans kind of forces you.
yeah, to to find your own definitions and
Who knows? I wonder if it's weird that I haven't written a lot of explicitly trans stuff. Like, as a trans person, I'm probably the trans writer I know who has the least amount of explicitly trans content. Like apart from some stuff I've written for anthologies and stuff, my work has never explicitly addressed it.
One of the things I did over the summer was to hit a lot of the public libraries and say, I want children's books that have queer themed stories to them, and I wanted to write reviews. And this one librarian was very helpful, and she got me Kyle Lukoff, and she got me a bunch of other stuff and stacked it up. And I was about to check out, and she said, "Oh, and of course, there's Phoebe and her unicorn. That's not about
Just
trans stuff, but the author is trans." And I said, "Yeah, but absolutely. Let me try that." And
how widely known is that fact about me? I always wonder that. I have no idea. Like I meet people who know and people who don't know, and I can't detect a pattern. Like I was being driven around in San Jose last week by a lady from the bookstore that was hosting me, and she's driving me to schools and stuff. And she says one of those things that when people say it, you know they haven't figured out you're trans. It was I said something like, "Oh, I didn't play sports in school. I was a band geek." And she said, "Really? You're tall. I'm surprised you were never recruited into playing basketball or volleyball." I feel like volleyball is the tell because it's so associated with women's sports. But also, I'm not that tall. I'm 5'9". Like nobody looks at a 5'9" boy and goes, "You should play basketball."
I wanted to segue a little bit into influences. You've said that Phoebe and her unicorn. No, I'm changing that. Sorry, Phoebe and the unicorn.
You can just say Heavenly Nostrils if you want to.
Maybe, yeah, we could do Heavenly Nostrils.
I will accept Phoebe and the unicorn for sure.
Marigold and her girl.
Marigold and her human.
And her human. Okay, but you've said that the strip is Susie's revenge. Tell me a little bit about that. Just who's Susie and how is this her revenge?
Of course, Susie is Susie Durkins. The kid Calvin knows. I mean, Calvin and Hobbes. I hesitate to say they're friends. Susie seems like a really smart, interesting little girl. She has tea parties with her stuffed animals. She does her homework. She seems to actually know things and read books. She seems like she might possibly grow up to be Daria Morgentorfer or something. I mean, who knows? We'll never know that because Watterson is only interested in Susie as a contrast to Calvin.
Right.
I always felt like Susie, I mean, it's Calvin's comics, so whatever, but Susie is more pleasant to spend time with than Calvin is. Calvin is a little, I'm a children's author, I shouldn't cuss. Susie just seems so much more interesting. Phoebe is sort of taking a Susie personality, like a smart, interesting little girl, and centering her in the story. And I feel like that was kind of overdue. Watterson said once, I think this is in the Calvin and Hobbes 10th anniversary book, which I read dozens of times when I was younger. After so many strips about boys, a comic strip about a little girl drawn by a woman would be great to read. And I remember reading that at the time. And that book came out when I was, I don't know, in high school. I remember reading it and thinking, oh, if only I could be that person. Guess what?
And there you are.
Yeah, turns out I am she who's coming, Watterson foretold.
The prophecy fulfilled.
I have never met Bill Watterson. I would like to.
Oh, yeah.
We had the same book editor for several years, but I've never met him. Her name is Dorothy O'Brien. And Dorothy's a legend. I'm glad I got to work with her for a few years. She edited Calvin and Hobbes, she edited The Far Side, she edited Doonesbury. She edited just innumerable great comic strips over her long and storied career. And I had her for a few years right at the end. And I was kind of in awe of her, honestly. This is somebody who's had her fingers on every strip I ever loved.
Yeah. Yeah. All of the things that formed who you are creatively.
Yeah.
One of the things, though, that some of the comparisons are pretty obvious in terms of the young kid and the talking animal. But the important distinction for me between Phoebe and her unicorn and Calvin and Hobbes is that everything wonderful and colorful and imaginative that happens in Calvin and Hobbes is only happening in his head.
Yeah, Calvin
Waters,
Hobbes is about imagination.
right.
It,
And Watterson would sometimes pull back, like they used to at the end of the Winnie the Pooh specials, to sort of remind the viewer that no, it's just a raggedy old stuffed tiger, and everything else,
yeah,
all those beautiful Sunday strips with the dinosaurs and the spaceships, that's all in his imagination. In your strip, all of the wonder and the glory is real. And as a trans woman, I took that as a bit of a metaphor that I don't want
you
to
might be
be
right.
I don't want to be thinking that anything that might be beautiful or wonderful about me only exists in my head. I want to be able to look in the mirror and see something pretty, see something beautiful and engaging and all of those things that Marigold is, and all of the side characters, all of you, that your goblins and the, I'm forgetting the name, but the candy puking dragon, which always,
Todd. His name is Todd.
Todd, right, makes me laugh every
Yeah.
time. But all of those things are real, the way you and I had to make ourselves real.
This is why I love doing interviews like this. You've just given me something to think about and maybe taught me something about my own work.
Ooh.
Because I absolutely think you're right about that. I think that is maybe, I think that was a conscious choice. And I think maybe even related to the trans thing. In fact, I may steal that and start saying it.
Please.
Because it does actually feel like that. Like in Calvin and Hobbes, it really all is just happening in this kid's imagination. And it's about the power of imagination, but because when the camera pulls back, you do just see Hobbes is a stuffed tiger and Calvin is just talking to his stuffed tiger all day. Watterson used to say, like, I don't want, he didn't do merchandising at all. And he would say, I don't want a toy maker resolving the issue of Hobbes' reality. My man, you resolved the issue of Hobbes' reality. You were very clear where that line is.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'd be surprised how often I have to explain to people. Or like I read like a story about a little girl and her imaginary unicorn friend. Marigold's not imaginary. She, within the world of the strip, she is as real as any other character. You can tell because characters who aren't Phoebe interact with her all the time.
Right. And she has an ability, one of her numerous abilities is to hide herself from humans at times, but
she has a spell called the Shield of Boringness, which doesn't so much hide unicorns, it makes them seem unremarkable. It's something that they use so that people don't go, oh, a unicorn, and mob them. People just go, oh, hey, a unicorn. Anyway, what's the score? And yeah, it's and wouldn't we all like to have a shield of boringness occasionally? Aren't there moments when you feel like your like eyes are on you and you wish that they weren't? I feel like that's kind of a trans thing too.
Absolutely. When I'm in Home Depot, yeah.
Yeah, you want people to go, oh, hey, a trans person.
Yep.
Oh, anyway, where are the boards? Whatever.
I need a 5/6 socket wrench. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you've taught me something about my own work today, an angle I never quite looked at it from. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Speaking, I'm just completely off the subject here. Do you ever talk to anybody about an omnibus edition?
I've thought about it. I feel like I'd like to do some stuff for the 10th anniversary of the comic. And if you go by the 10th anniversary of this strip starting at all, when it was just running online, that was this year. The strip is 10 years old as of April. And we did do some like 10th anniversary promotional stuff at the time. But the 10th anniversary of the strip in newspaper syndication is in 2025. And I'd love to do like an omnibus. I'd love to do, like I said, I read the Calvin and Hobbes 10th anniversary book many, many times. I loved that, or like the prehistory of the Far Side, or 10 ever-loving blue-eyed years of Pogo. I loved books like that where the creator sort of digs into it and you get their voice commenting on some of the content. And I'd like to do something like that. Like
and the artwork too. I can remember reading through Doonesbury collections and thinking, wow, you went from really raw to stylized here, and
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Peanuts too, right? The
I
original
love that.
Peanuts look
I love
very
seeing the development of comics over time. Like it's always this way with a comic strip. If you look at year one of any comic, it's visually so different. And sometimes the voice of it is completely different. I mean, the most extreme example of that, I think, is Bloom County,
yes.
which, if you look at year one of Bloom County, it's not even the same cast. Most of those characters from year one didn't stick around, and most of the characters you think of as the Bloom County characters aren't there yet. Opus isn't there yet.
Okay, well, I'm going to. This is not a video podcast, so you're going to have to describe this. I'm going to hold an object up that I think is something you and I have in common.
Oh, holy yes. I
The,
have had my plush Opus penguin from Bloom County, for those who don't know that. I've had, yeah. She just held up a plush Opus. I have the same one. I've had it since I was 10 years old, and it lives in my studio space. You'd see it behind me if I was upstairs at my desk instead of down here. I was such a big fan of that strip in the 80s. And of course, I was a little kid in the 80s, but like, that was what I loved about it. It was a little over my head, but that was fun. I'd read it and I wouldn't understand what it was about. And I'd end up having like Iran Contra explained to me. And I'd get to
right.
learn something and feel smart.
Yeah.
And kids love it's one reason that in my work now I don't talk down to my audience. Like obviously I'm not explaining Iran Contra to them. It's not that kind of strip. But I get letters from parents who are like, "Hey, my kid uses the word scintillating all the time now, and it's your fault."
Well, you include, at least in the later editions, you include a glossary so that
I
you.
wish we'd thought of that in the very beginning.
But that.
Like when they were like, "We're gonna start putting a glossary," I was like,
Oh.
"Yeah, let's do that." Why didn't we start doing that from book one? Because
But
I as a kid reading that, and putting myself in a kid's shoes reading it, I would love to be able to come to a concept like a multiverse theory and skip to the end and have it explained to me.
and as a writer, that gives you the freedom not to talk down to your audience. You can come up with a
Yeah,
word that you know fits that moment, and you realize, oh, I don't have to alter that because my reader is in fourth grade, or you can just use it and let them build their vocab. It's brilliant.
absolutely. Yeah.
Let me go back to some of the characters, because I could just have this conversation all day with you. Um,
I often do.
one of the challenges of a strip is that characters really aren't allowed to change, within a certain parameters, and
Or
so
if you do, you have to make a really big deal out of it.
right, and so Andy Capp is always going to be a drunk, and Lucy's always going to pull the football away, but and I guess Doonesbury and For Better or For Worse are
Those are special
exceptions.
examples because those characters age and go through different phases of life, and
Yeah,
that's sort of the point of those comics.
but those are the exception rather than the rule. But
Yeah,
within your strip, I love the fact that Phoebe's relationship to Dakota evolves and changes. That it just seemed it would have been so easy for Dakota to be just a one-dimensional foil, and
you know whose
she's
fault this is?
tell me.
There is a person whose fault that is. That person is my sister Nicole.
Oh, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I'll tell her you said that. Yeah, I originally wrote Dakota as just a mean girl foil for Phoebe. In her first one or two appearances, that's all she is. She's just like, dweeby Phoebe. But then my sister Nicole, sort of, who by the way is a great artist in her own right, and she designed the goblins.
Love,
The goblins are from a sketch by my sister.
love, love, love the goblins. Blart,
Oh, my sister,
blart,
sister's
blart,
great,
blart.
and one of these years, she and I are going to do a book together. But that's down the road. She looked at Dakota and was like, "Oh, I like this kid. Who's she? Tell me about her." And like her taking an interest in Dakota fleshed Dakota out, and I ended up putting a lot of my sister's personality into
Oh,
this character.
nice.
My sister, who is contrarian and very individual, and not superficially that much like Dakota, but something about Dakota's style and attitude just sort of spoke to her. And so she sort of became my Dakota person, my Dakota whisperer. She would, and I still, like, when I'm writing Dakota, I still sometimes run Dakota stuff by her. And like, how would this happen? What would she say here? And so Dakota ended up becoming a much fuller character than I ever expected her to. And this is one of the fun things about writing a character who will sometimes just do things you don't know they're going to do. Sometimes they just take on a life of their own and they tell you who they are and what they're going to do.
Yeah.
I sort of got Dakota away from the goblins just because it seemed like all Dakota's stories ended up being about her and goblins for a while. And then I was like, I just had her have a falling out with the Goblin Queen and just sort of peace out from that relationship, because it was like, and lately she's been hanging out with Lord Splendid Humility.
Well, I was going to say, so there are characters who can change a little bit. Certainly Phoebe and Marigold's relationship changed over time. Phoebe and
Yeah,
Dakota,
definitely.
Max, gets a little bit deeper as you go along. But some of
I
your
want to do
characters,
more stuff with Max and his parents. I want to like
yeah,
center the sticker on them for like a week and see what they do.
I agree.
So many things to get on. There's so many unexplored corners of this world.
Yeah. Well, we've
You have
seen,
to remember to take the camera off Phoebe and Marigold for a
Marigold,
few
yeah,
minutes.
but we've seen so much of the way Phoebe interacts with her parents, that seeing how Max interacts with his would be really neat. It would really add
Oh,
dimension.
and I'll get yelled at by homophobes.
Of course you will.
I mean, that happens now, so it's not going to be a huge change.
Well, that was going to be my question. I've watched interviews with Kyle Lukoff, who has talked about sort of embracing the fact that he's called an imminent threat to your children, for writing compassionate stories about queer people. Do you?
Kids aren't allowed to know there are queer people.
But but we do exist, don't we? We're not.
I'm pretty sure.
We're not. Okay.
Ow. Yeah,
Okay.
I exist.
Me too.
Yeah, but you were saying
Do you get much pushback? Much?
not as much as you might think. I illustrated this picture book called "I'm Not a Girl" a couple years ago. It's published by Macmillan. You can get it wherever you can get books, or wherever they haven't banned it. It was written by, at the time he started working on this, he was a young trans boy. He was 9 when he started working on this book. He's 15 now. He's a remarkable young man, and I really admire his being willing to put himself out there in this way, because we've gotten some stuff for having published this book, and I'm old, I can take it, but I feel for Maddox because he's young and he has to deal with all of this. But he's for a while, FoxNews.com had a picture of our book and their illustration for why our children are under assault by the LGBT community. And I was like, well, what do you do? Fox gonna Fox? But I know Maddox's mom, Rachel, like spoke to Macmillan's legal department, like, can we do anything? And Macmillan was like, yeah, we've looked into it. Unfortunately, First Amendment, which whatever. But it was nice that they that were on top of the situation, even if there wasn't much that they could do. I don't get that much crap from people, which makes me wonder if people haven't noticed I'm trans. Like, seems like librarians know or whatever, but it's not obvious from my work. And I actually think I have a fair amount of passing privilege. So I think it's information you don't necessarily come across about me. And I think you can, even if you're a transphobe, you can hand your kid my book and they can enjoy it, and you never even know that you have just given them work by a dirty LGBT. When Max's parents debuted in the comic, I got a certain amount of that. I got some 1-star reviews that were like, I will never give my daughter one of these again. There are lesbians in it. I got an email from somebody around that time. It was like, my daughter came to me sobbing that they were lesbians in her favorite book series. It was like, 1, no, she didn't. I don't believe you that happened. But 2, maybe you shouldn't be raising your kid to be a bigot. Like, it's not my fault you did that. Lesbians exist in the world. My sister and her wife would like a word.
Yes, exactly. The line that you're drawing there is very real, that at a certain point we as adults learn there's a degree of difficulty in in living this way. But to put teenagers in that spot and expect them to deal with everything teenagers have to deal with anyway, and
And that, can you imagine
that
being a
hostility.
teenager?
Yeah.
You imagine being a teenager and just wanting to exist and live your life and suddenly finding yourself at the center of this controversy. You can see me making finger quotes, but maybe your audience cannot. But understand that I have put as much sauce on that word as I could put on it. And yeah, can you imagine like when being young and having half the country arguing about whether you should exist?
Yeah.
That it must suck. I'm in my 40s and it sucks.
As if any of you had any say, you know?
Yeah.
You
How
don't.
does this affect you? Go back to doing whatever it is straight people do. I assume it involves football.
And just leave us and our unicorns alone.
Yeah, we're not telling you how you're allowed to be. But this seems like a good place to talk about what it was like when I came out.
Please.
I was in my 20s when I came out, and I invite you to take yourself back in time to the early 2000s. I was a web cartoonist at the time. Before Phoebe and Your Unicorn, I did a comic called Ozzie and Millie for many years. It was one of the first web comics that started in 1998. And it had a reasonably sized audience for an early web comic. I think a few thousand people. It was really hard to figure out how many people were reading any given web comic. My guesses for it were anywhere between 10,000 and 50,000 people reading it daily at its peak, which felt pretty good. I didn't make much money off it because this was the days before Patreon. But it was a reasonably big webcomic. I had eyes on me. And one day what I was going through in my life at the time is I always just wanted to be a cartoonist, but I couldn't seem to get syndicated. That was a few years away still. I couldn't seem to make any money off being a web cartoonist because there wasn't a lot of money to be made on being a web cartoonist at that time. I was sort of drifting in terms of supporting myself in life. I was a reporter for a while. That didn't work out because I just wanted to draw comics. I had a data entry job, but that sucked. I went to grad school, but that didn't work out because I really didn't want to be there. I was just there because I couldn't think what else to do with myself. Eventually, I moved in with the person who is now my spouse, who said, look, if all you want is to draw comics, just move in with me and I will support you while you chase that dream. We all deserve that. It was a pivotal moment in my life. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. They lived in Michigan at the time and I was in Washington. And so I had to explain to my parents, hey, I'm dropping out of grad school to move in with my internet boyfriend in Michigan, which they didn't love. But now they're like, you made the right decision. I'm like, yeah, I know. I knew that at the time. You just didn't really believe me. So one day, a few months after that, I'm at an outdoor festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan, top of the park, 2005. And I'm looking around, I'm looking at the guys, I'm looking at the girls, and it's like a voice inside my head. I seem to have a lot of those. Spoke up and just got a little louder than it had been in the past. The voice just told me, you know what you are. And I didn't know any trans people. It turned out I did. They just weren't out to me. Right. But at the time, I had never knowingly met a trans person at this time. I just knew in the abstract that it was possible to transition. If you'd asked me to name some trans people, I think I knew who Wendy Carlos was. I think I knew who Renee Richards was. Mm-hmm. Somebody explained who Danielle Bunton was to me around that time. She was a famous early video game designer and kind of a trans pioneer. But it was just this vague idea that a few famous people who were much older than me had transitioned at various times. But it was like being the first person to wake up from the Matrix, which is a thing I started saying before I knew the Matrix was a trans allegory.
Right.
But I wasn't surprised to learn that. I was like, oh, so that's why I've been saying that this whole time. And one of the problems I ran into, because remember, I'm a web cartoonist at this point. One of the problems I had was I have to tell my audience. I have to come out to this audience of somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 people. And the reaction was not at all what it would be now. Almost no one was supportive. I actually did great with family and friends. I was very lucky in that regard. I got a lot of I'm not sure I get this, but I just want you to be happy, which is sort of the best you can expect.
Right.
And I got better than that from a few people. Like, for instance, my mother picked my current first name. That was a beautiful conversation.
Wow.
But my audience was another story. I got to read all over the internet that I'd gone crazy. I got to
And this
I
is in
got
the
to read.
early 2000s.
This is 2005. I came out, so it's mid 2000s by this point. Yeah, people said that I'd gone crazy. People acted like I'd invented being trans, either because I'd completely lost my mind or because I was desperate for attention. I was like, I have an audience that is bigger than you will ever have. I'm not starved for attention. This is just who I am. I'm still honestly, I'm still bitter about this because it was like I just asked for understanding, and I got it from all the people who actually knew me, but a bunch of people who didn't know me, they just read my work, decided they were entitled to judge me. And I watch people come out like on Twitter, sometimes web cartoonists I know from then, people my own age who have just come out in the last few years. And it's like people throw them a party. I mean, I realize they get crap from people too. I realize there's pushback, that no one escapes the pushback. But there's also like a lot more support and a lot more positivity for people who come out now in that space. And I'm very happy for them that they get that. I'm very happy that the world changed. But part of me just kind of goes, where was this when I needed it?
Yeah.
Because that was really hard. It slowed my transition down that everyone was yelling at me. I would have probably gone through transition faster and not spent so much time agonizing, like, can I really go through with this? If it weren't for the fact that people were making fun of me, drawing lewd images of me, people who'd never met me, people who knew nothing about me other than that I read a web cartoon that they had read a few times. Oh God, I'm still really angry about this.
I can hear it. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It was, yeah, I was mistreated by a lot of people who I had done nothing to harm.
Now, did you find yourself backing away from your web comics so that you didn't have to interact with these people, or did you just?
Yeah, a bit. Like I locked my live journal. I kept drawing the comic for a few years after that. I did bring it to an end in 2008. That wasn't necessarily why, but I can't say it wasn't a factor. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want an audience. I wanted to be left alone because the idea of having eyes on me had started to feel dangerous. And that had never been true before. When the world identified me as a white guy, I could say whatever I wanted, and nobody would make anything of it. At worst, somebody might go, "You're a jerk" once in a while if I had an opinion that they disagreed with enough. You come out as trans, and suddenly, if you so much as say, "I don't like that," you get accused of throwing some kind of public temper tantrum. It was just the way people treated me, the way people looked at me, just turned 180 degrees overnight when I came out. And I considered just never doing anything public facing again. And I did kind of drop off the internet for a couple of years. I kept posting my comic till 2008. Then I retired it. And I started seeing all the like, what happened to DC Simpson? Where are they now? Kind of stuff about myself. And of course, in 2009, I won the comic strip superstar contest. And suddenly I had a development contract. And I then was handing stuff in every month, but I couldn't post any of that online either. So I still was reading like, oh, what happened to DC Simpson? I heard some real fun rumors about myself. My favorite rumor that I heard during that time was that I had been fired from my contract for plagiarizing myself. The argument seemed to be that I had reused an Ozzy and Millie joke in my girl submission when I won the contest, and that they had fired me for it. That is, for the record, not true. I'm not sure that's a thing that could happen. But like then I reemerged when Phoebe launched in 2012. And it's like, I'm back. Here's my new comic. And I expected a barrage of hate. Nothing at all. Everything I got was positive. I've waited for 10 years for that other shoe to drop. It never dropped. Everybody's been great. I wonder if a lot of the bullies from the mid 2000s had aged out of 4chan by this time, right. And the new bullies had other targets besides me. I wasn't doing anything that invited their attention, but then I wasn't in the first place, arguably. I've never understood quite why, but God, I wish I had this in front of me because I don't remember who said this, but a friend called my attention to this one quote, and it's been at the core of my understanding of this, that when people do that, what they're saying is, you squandered an opportunity I should have had. And I wondered if that was at the core of it. If that was, I'm drawing a web comic that you admire, and then I come out as trans, and you sort of feel like I'm, and it makes no sense when I say it out loud, but it kind of, I almost get how you get there mentally.
That
That you're like,
their engagement
you,
with your strip gives them ownership somehow, or that's
yeah,
a
and
spot that they could have
that
filled. Is that
yours, people who liked Ozzy really didn't just enjoy it. They saw it as representing something. A lot of them, I think, they saw it as representing this tradition. Because most web comics at the time were about video games or about, like, mine was the one that people saw as sort of carrying on the, like, Calvin and Hobbes, Pogo, Peanuts kind of tradition. That was what people liked about Ozzy and Millie. It seemed very traditional and seemed to be carrying a torch for the past in a way that a lot of webcomics didn't. And I think a lot of the haters looked at that and they were like, you stood for something traditional. In my mind, how dare you become a freak?
mm,
How dare you? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to, how dare you not meet my expectations?
right?
How dare you challenge me by existing? You were supposed to just be normal. And then when I got successful, it was like, you can't argue I'm squandering anything. If Phoebe came out and people liked it, it was successful pretty quickly. And everyone has left me alone. I get the occasional hate, but usually from, like, never from that crowd. It's never the 4chaner for the lulz crowd anymore. It was all, now it's always like some parent who's mad there are lesbians. It's like the hate comes from a completely different direction. It's never as concentrated. It's always some lone angry person.
When you were going through this with the web comic, were you with your now spouse at the time? Did you have that
Yes,
support?
this is the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. And I say this as somebody who won a contest that made my career.
Mm,
The luckiest thing that ever happened to me was I met my spouse when we were 18. We met online in 1995, which was disreputable in those days. And my parents were like, how do you know this person is who they say they are? It's like, how do you know anybody is who they say they are? People on the internet aren't more likely to be lying. We've spoken on the phone. I've seen pictures. And in 1998, we met in person for the first time. And, like, we didn't necessarily know we were in love. I think our friends knew that before we did. We just knew we were best friends and we couldn't imagine life without each other.
mm,
And eventually it was like, oh, I guess we might just be in love. And we moved in together when I dropped out of grad school, and we've been together ever since then. We've been married for many years now. Oh, fun fact about me being married, since this is a trans podcast.
mm.
We got married in Washington in 2010. This is 2 years before Washington had same-sex marriage. When I transitioned, I went through the whole process of updating my driver's license, my birth certificate, my social security card, whatever document I could find to update. My college diploma has my proper name on it now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then we walked into the marriage license office in 2010, and all they wanted was my driver's license. It was the first thing I changed. It was like, wait a minute, we could have done this like 3 or 4 years ago,
That's
but
it.
no one tells you. Presumably, we both lived in states that make it easy-ish. Like, Washington did not make it that hard. That was where I lived at the time. I'm in California now. Washington made it relatively easy. I remember walking. I had to get some doctor's signatures and stuff,
Mhm.
which was annoying, but it wasn't that hard. I had a therapist who was this old trans man who had been through all of it a million times and knew where all of the holes in the system were. It was just like, here, I'll get a doctor to write you this. I never met the doctor. He just got it for me. I gave it to the people at the DMV. They updated my license. It was painless on my end. Everybody deserves that. I think if you didn't have somebody like him, it would be harder. As late as when I transitioned in 05, people were still saying transsexual a lot.
Yep.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
transgender existed as a word, but it existed as sort of one of several that was competing for that language space.
Yeah, most of which were not flattering.
No.
Well, listen, this has been wonderful.
Kind of, yeah. I hope it's all right that I went to sort of that I went down memory lane to some sort of angry places.
No, I'm flattered that you felt comfortable doing that.
Honestly, I view this as my most important contribution to the trans conversation. My work is not about this mostly, although I'm working on a memoir that I will finish someday, I swear. I've been working on it for 7 years.
Ooh.
And what I want to do with it keeps changing. But I do hope, and this is why I never went like just stealth, even though at times I was sort of tempted to just, if I don't talk about it ever again, maybe everyone will forget. That enters my mind sometimes. I feel like it's important because I'm not a celebrity. I'm not Laverne Cox. I'm also not really an activist. I'm just some lady who draws that funny book about unicorns that your kid liked. I've been happily married for years. I live in the suburbs. I am the most boring middle-aged white lady you can imagine.
We can see
Also,
that
I'm just
with
just
Marigold's jammies, by the way. Marigold's jammies are also adorable. And
speaking of animals wearing clothes.
Yeah, see, but I'm making an exception for her leg warmers and her jammies.
They're so cute. How do you argue with that?
Yeah.
It was fun when I started drawing a unicorn, thinking like, what are the visually fun things I can do with this? And they're just endless. And a lot of storylines are just, what do I want to draw? Oh, I know. I want to draw Marigold roller skating. And then it just becomes a story.
Well,
that's my closing message, though. I am a boring ass white lady who draws unicorn comics, and I'm trans, and you don't need to be afraid of us, people.
So here's your homework for next time. Check out Phoebe and Her Unicorn at gocomics.com. Send me an audio file of your best reading of Marigold. What does she sound like in your head? Does she sound like she has heavenly nostrils? And to my librarian friends, make sure you have a full set of this soon-to-be 17-volume series on your shelves, and contact Dana directly. Let her know how wonderful her work is. I'm going to have to listen to this episode again, but I'm pretty sure she promised to send me a free copy of an omnibus, should that happen. I'm going to put links to everything, including the unicorn name generator, in the show notes. Please let me know what your preferred unicorn name is. This is Transqat. I'm Misty Timelegs, as in parsley, sage, rosemary, and thanks for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. Just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtransqat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.